Good afternoon. Test, test. Is that sound acceptable to folks? Maybe a little bit loud. I'll step back a bit. My name is Brian. This is Glenn. We're glad to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's on the college scorecard, and then Glenn is going to talk a little bit about the data that gets put into NSLDS and how that gets translated into the data. So first, let's just talk about college scorecard and what it is. The primary purpose of the college scorecard is to provide consumer information to help prospective students and their advocates make enrollment decisions. We certainly don't discourage people from using it for other purposes like institutional benchmarking or accreditation or other things. So there's multiple purposes, but the primary purpose is indeed for consumer information. College Scorecard has three main components. It has the data files, which provide extensive information about individual institutions and fields of study within those institutions. It has an API, and this component allows developers to tap into those data more efficiently. And lastly, the consumer tool, which is something built on our API, and that presents a subset of highlighted data elements for prospective students and their advocates. So three things. While scorecard data files provide over 2,000 data elements for each institution, I'm not going to go through all 2,000. I'll just go through some of the highlights. Post-enrollment or post-completion earnings. For these data, just wanted to caveat that we don't have information for all students. We have information for federally aided students. So for many of these metrics, these data only describe those students who receive federal financial aid. Post-enrollment or post-completion earnings is definitely in that bucket, as is cumulative median debt, in which we describe the federal loan debt of federal loan borrowers. Graduation rate information comes from the IPED survey. It's from NCS. So does average annual cost. And I'll talk a little bit more about what these mean later, but that's essentially the net price. And lastly, enrollment information, including just straight up enrollment counts or disaggregations by different subgroups. Those also come from the IPED survey. To show some of the highlighted data, I'm just going to walk through our consumer tool. Here's a screenshot of our consumer tool. You can find different institutions by just typing in a name. You could type in a custom search, or we have some broad categories to get people started as well. Upon a search query, we also on the left side provide additional ways for you to filter and look for individual institutions. So for example, if I were to click on one of these institutions, I would see an individual institution profile. This is the top of an institution profile, and it shows a lot of the institutional characteristics. These are primarily directory information from the IPED survey, including the name of the institution, where it's located, the enrollment. One thing I wanted to point out is this 4-year, 2-year, and certificate distinction. That might be a little bit different than what you're used to seeing in Navigator or other platforms. That 4-year describes a predominant award type. Predominant award type is the most, it's not actually the most, but it's the most frequent type of undergraduate award. So if it's an undergraduate certificate, associate's degree, or bachelor's degree. So if you had more associates than both certificates and bachelors, then we would label that as a 2-year institution. So if it's like 40, 30, 30, we take the 40. So it's not necessarily the majority. The other things are fairly straightforward. I'll go down to the graduation rate now, and that's based on IPED's data. That comes for degree granting institutions, the 8-year completion after entering the institution, regardless of full-time, first-time, part-time, transfer, and status. But we don't have those data for all institutions. So for non-degree granting institutions that don't report to the outcomes measures survey, that represents 200% of normal time for first-time, full-time students only. Salary after completing is by what we call fields of study, and I'm gonna kind of get into what that means at a later time. But essentially, what it is the major and the degree type. So this is a range. The lowest and the highest at the undergraduate level is what this is showing in this particular profile. And the average annual cost, which, sorry, it's a little bit chopped off, but if I were to scroll a little bit lower, you would be able to see the number, and that number would represent the net price for federally aided students. So each institutional profile also provides additional information on various aspects if you kind of scroll down into each institutional profile. This particular institution example has a $19,779 net price, and that's also broken out by family income quintiles. Also, for students that want to calculate their own using a net price calculator, we have a link for that. We also have a way to dig in a little bit more on graduation rate. We also provide retention rates. And then on the bottom of this screen, you can see that this is just more details from the outcome measures survey, where we provide not only the graduation rate, but also the transfer, withdrew, still enrolled rate. And if you click on the different full-time, part-time, started college here, transferred in, you can see different disaggregations of that. There's also what we call expandable, we actually call them accordions, because when you click on them, they kind of expand. There's an accordion that features information about federal student aid and borrowing. This provides information on the frequency of borrowing, so that's what that 26% represents, the proportion of undergraduates that borrow. And similar to earnings, we have a range for median debt. So this is upon completion for different fields of study. You'll see there's a little icon for sociology bachelor's degree, and that's just because if you were to hover over it, sorry, this isn't a live demo, you would be able to see that this lower number is attributed to sociology and by bachelor's degree. If I were to hover over the 24,551 value, I would see a different field of study. The monthly loan payment is based on a 10-year standard payment plan and the current interest rate. So those are just monthly payments translated from that cumulative debt number above. So one of the new things as of 2 weeks ago that we're featuring is information by fields of study. I will get into exactly more details later on the field of study, but basically what we're providing is a sort by the top 10, whether it's the largest or the highest debt or the lowest debt or the highest earnings. We allow our users to look at the number of graduates, the typical median loan debt, and earnings 1 year after graduation. We also translate that into monthly terms, just so students can get a sense of what they're going to have to pay based on what they're going to have to, what money they'll have in terms of what they earn. I will note that these are all, on our consumer website, these are all undergraduate values, but we do have this separate web page where if we click on the See All Available Fields of Study, you'll be able to see pretty much everything, all the data that we have on the institution, including graduate level. So here's an example of a master's degree information, but again, this is kind of a separate page from everything else which we've talked about so far, which is focusing on undergraduate. The last two accordions that are offered on the individual school profiles talk about just the demographics of the institution. Again, these come from the IPED survey. We also have information about acceptance rates and test scores, typical test scores. These are the 25th and 75th percentiles for each respective SAT and ACT test. So that's essentially highlights of the information that we provide. We do also have a comparison tool so that you can select up to 10 different institutions, and you can compare different data elements. Again, these are just a small subset of the 2,000 data elements that we do provide in our downloadable data files or our API. So let me talk about a little bit of what's changed this year compared to prior years. The biggest change kind of stems from a March executive order. And this March executive order prescribed that College Scorecard begin producing both program level, which we call fields of study on our consumer site. I'll get into that a little bit later. And also some new institution level data. So as of November 20th, we have published estimated median earnings and the cumulative loan debt. So that was just 2 or 3 weeks ago. One thing that I wanted to mention is that the estimated median earnings is only 1 year out from graduation. That's because we have limited historical data in NSLDS to construct cohorts. So the long-term goal will be to have a longer look-back period, all the way up to 10 years. But we just don't have enough historical data. So as each year goes, we'll have more data. So next year, the preliminary goal would be, 2-year data. And then we'd have, essentially, we'd like to get 5-year data consistently and 10-year data consistently, and then either 1 or 3 years also. So we'll continue to learn more, but we're publishing what we have right now, basically. We also have in our executive order a mandate to develop new default and repayment rates, both at the program level and at the institution level. More to come in 2020. Just wanted to say a little bit about what we mean by program level, because I kind of brushed through some of the earnings and debt information by program, and we had a technical, a TRP, a technical review panel, that sort of came up with this term fields of study, which we prefer because it's, I think, a little bit more representative of what these identifiers are describing. So the first thing that we have is the 6-digit OPID. That's what we use as the institutional identifier in calculating earnings and debt. we have a 4-digit CIP code. So classification of instruction program. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with that, but basically it's a taxonomy based on a 6-digit code where the first 2 digits are sort of the broadest descriptor. The next 4 digits a little bit more granular, and the 6-digit CIP code is the most granular. I'll give you an example of that. But all that is to say that the 4-digit CIP code represents not the most granular sort of observation of a program. It's going to be a combination of programs. The last unique identifier of what makes a program or a field of study is the credential level code. And these are the credential level codes in NSLDS, excuse me, from undergraduate certificates all the way to professional degrees and graduate professional certificates at the highest level. Here's what I was talking about in terms of CIP codes. I chose this example because it was first in alphabetical order, or in terms of numerical order. The 2-digit CIP code for agriculture is 01, and within that there are several 4-digit CIP codes. For example, agriculture, business, and management is 0101. Agriculture mechanization, sorry, I probably should have put a 0 in front of the 102, but it's a 0102, and the list goes on and on. But what's important to note is that although 6-digit CIP codes, agriculture, business, management, general, agribusiness, agricultural business operations, those all fit under 0101, business and management. So if there's any variation for earnings or debt at that level, that variation will not be observed because we're aggregating all of those programs that fit into these 6-digit CIP codes into agriculture, business, and management. So just to drill in a little bit more on what we've released in 2019 for earnings by field of study, this is, as I mentioned before, the 1-year post-completion earnings, and it includes all the Title IV students who completed in 14-15 and 15-16, measured 1 year later. So 14-15 would be measured in 2016. Their earnings would be measured in calendar year 2016. 15-16 is measured in 2017, and we combine those cohorts to create a median across the 2 years. We exclude those who were enrolled in school the year that the earnings was calculated. So basically, if you went on from an associate's or to a bachelor's, or a bachelor's to a master's, we would eliminate you because you weren't earning money, right? You were studying. If you had died, obviously we would remove you from the cohort. Military deferments in the year of the earnings year, we would also remove you from the cohort. And also, the earnings are not based on those who did not work. So it's only for those who were working. So any $0 earners would not be included in the earnings measurement. The median earnings are calculated from W-2 forms and from the 1040, the SE form, which provides for self-employment. So that's on the earnings side. If we talk about cumulative loan debt, those were calculated for also over a 2-year period. This is we have data that goes all the way back to 14, 15, 15, 16, but what we present on our consumer site is the 15, 16, 16, 17. We don't mask any of the data. It's all available in the downloadable data files in terms of if you are interested in looking at trend data. But I'm just highlighting that that's what we're presenting on our consumer site. This includes only loan disbursements upon completion. It includes all debt disbursed only by the evaluated institution, so we don't combine debt from different institutions. And then we also only combine loans at the graduate level or the undergraduate level. So if we're evaluating a master's program, we would not count any undergraduate loans that you have in determining the cumulative loan debt to complete that master's program. Includes only Stafford and Graduate Plus loans, but as you may remember from a couple slides ago, we will have information about Plus loans and Parent Plus loans. For this particular calculation of what we have available now, we exclude Perkins loans as well, and we'll continue to exclude Perkins loans. So that's kind of a broad overview of the new data elements that we introduced a couple weeks ago for both earnings and debt. Just to kind of review the key concepts, here's kind of 3 example students. The first example student is a borrower that withdraws without completing. And even though they complete in the time that we're evaluating, we're going to exclude that student in both calculations, because as you may remember from the 2 slides, we're only taking graduates from particular programs. So this particular student would not be included in any of our calculations. The second example is a Pell Grant recipient who did not borrow, who completed in the time that we're evaluating. Now, for debt, we're going to exclude that student because for debt, we're only including borrowers. But for earnings, we're going to include that student because we have a record of them having a Pell Grant. The last student example here is a borrower who receives an AA, an associate's degree, in the evaluation period, the cohort period that we're looking for, but then immediately enrolled in a BA program right afterwards. So we would include that student in the debt, but we would exclude that student from the earnings cohort because they were studying during the calendar year, which we measure the earnings. So I hope that provides some clarity on the methodology. With that, I'll turn it over to Glenn to talk a little bit more about how the data in NSLDS feed into these exclusions and this particular methodology.
Thanks, Brian.
Yep.
Hi, everyone. My name is Glenn Kirksey. I'm here from the NSLDS team today to talk to you a little bit about the NSLDS system's role in how College Scorecard calculates all this stuff. I am going to talk to you mostly today about program enrollment level data and why it's so important that when you're going through and doing your enrollment reporting, that you keep your program enrollment level data up to date and accurate as much as possible. And what we're going to do is just show you some scenarios that are going to be common ones that you're going to see in your data and how to fix those on NSLDS. So one big question you might be asking is, how can I tell which of my students are going to be placed into a given cohort for one of our programs? And the answer is enrollment, enrollment, enrollment. We're looking particularly at the program level enrollment data. What you see here is one of the NSLDS data screens here for program level enrollment. College Scorecard uses earnings and loan debt information, gets the earnings and loan debt information based on your program enrollment data that you all report to NSLDS, and it determines from that which students graduated within a given cohort year period, and that's how we start to form our buckets, which show up in the College Scorecard. The program level enrollment data that is reported to NSLDS, we're currently using data that's been reported by you all. to the NSLDS system since July 2014 to calculate some of the just released data on earnings and median loan and loan debt metrics that you're seeing now on the scorecard. There are a couple of different ways that you as a school user can get into NSLDS and look at your program level enrollment data. And one of those ways is through this screen that you see here, which is our program enrollment detail. You can find the program enrollment detail by just going to your enrollment tab on NSLDS and then looking for the program enrollment detail link and clicking on that. As you can see here in the example in this slide, your program enrollment detail on NSLDS contains data on each program your student is enrolled in at your institution, as well as their credential level for that program. And credential level is important, as you'll see a little later on. It also shows the CIP, the title of the program, in addition to the credential level, published program length, whether or not it's a special program or not, the program begin date, and the history of the student's enrollment status changes for each of your programs or each of that student's programs. In this example, we see a student who was enrolled in program CIP 520201, full-time, starting August 28th of 2013, and then graduated on May 19, 2015. So, go back a minute. So another valuable way to review your program, your enrollment data is through the enrollment report graduated/withdrawn program report. The previous method is great for when you want to look at one student at a time, but this report is a really handy tool that we have here in NSLDS for you that lets you pull out whole groups of your students at a time so you can look at them through the report and you can sort and sift your data to whatever your needs are. For example, this particular report includes students that have at least one program certified as either graduated or withdrawn within a specified time frame or a cohort. Using this report is a really easy way to help identify errors in your enrollment reporting or misreports that you'd like to correct. You can customize it by limiting it just to specific location code for one of your campuses, or you can limit it to specific effective dates of programs that you want to look at your institution. Alternatively, you could ask for a report that pulls back all the records with a graduated status or all the records with a withdrawn status. You can even limit this report by student SSN or name to pull back exactly what you like. This report's available in both the ad hoc and scheduled report format, and it's either fixed width or CSV format depending on what you need, and it'll be delivered to your SAIG mailbox. So when you run the report, it looks a bit like this. This is a snapshot of what your output will actually look like with all the relevant data that it contains. When you're reviewing the report, there are four main scenarios you're likely to see, and actually I should add a fifth in a moment here, but we'll talk about that too. The first four you're likely to see are that the school correctly reported graduated within a specified cohort. The second is that the school reported a withdrawn, but then subsequently reported, should have subsequently reported a G for graduated. The other example that you might see is that you see misreported effective dates for one reason or another associated with each of the programs. Or you could see that the school reported a graduated with an incorrect credential level. And then the final scenario is that the school never reported the student, which you'll want to fix as well. However, if you pull this report up and you're looking at all your data for all your students and everything looks good, it all falls under scenario one where everything looks correct, great, that's fantastic. Otherwise, let's take a closer look at each of these other error scenarios and see what you can do to correct. As I said before, the program level enrollment data is so vitally important to your school's calculations for the college scorecard, but also for your students' calculations for other areas like the subsidized usage limit and other areas that you're familiar with. For this reason, schools are strongly encouraged to ensure that the accuracy of previously reported program level enrollment data that was reported to NSLDS on or after July 1, 2014 occurs. Students that are identified with incorrect programs or who are missing from the graduated or withdrawn program report can be corrected using the enrollment history update page. So here is the enrollment history update page that we're talking about. On NSLDS, the financial aid professional site, you can get to this page from the main menu by clicking on the link to Enrollment History Update in the enrollment column on the far right here, which you see here we've got blown up. You can also get to it by clicking on the Enroll tab and then following the link to Enrollment History Update found at the top of the page, right above the student identifier fields when you go to enter your student identifier information. So let's take a look at some of the individual error scenarios that we were talking about. There are sometimes situations where, for one reason or another, a school needs to report a W before they report the G for their student. It might be a delay in processing that graduation that happens at the school, just administrative delay, but the school is trying to be diligent and do their part and report the fact that the student is no longer attending class here. We understand that when that happens, you are allowed to report that, but obviously you want to stay on top of that and make sure that you get that G in as soon as you do have it administratively recorded at your institution. So just a quick recap. In NSLDS, a G at the campus level should only be used when you have an aid recipient with a degree conferral who is no longer attending the institution. At the program level, the G should only be used when you have an aid recipient who has completed a specific program of study. And a W at the campus level should only be used when you have an aid recipient who has withdrawn from all courses at your institution. They're no longer taking anything there. A W at the program level should be used when you have an aid recipient who has withdrawn from the program without completing that program. A W, it should be noted, does not necessarily mean the aid recipient is enrolled in a different program. It just means they're no longer in that one. So we just wanted to take a moment to clarify the two because your accurate reporting of the graduate and withdrawal statuses is critical, not just for the scorecard cohorts, which we're talking about here today, but also for that 150% subsidized usage that we mentioned a moment ago. So let's take a closer look at this specific scenario here. This scenario, the school reported a student was withdrawn from their program and now wants to report G for graduated now that they've got it administratively certified. So we see here that Terry has completed all courses required to receive an associate's degree in tax law. While assessing Terry's completion of the program, North-South University reported a withdrawn status as of 5/13/2017 because Terry was no longer in attendance. Now that the graduation has been confirmed, North-South University must report Terry as graduated. So to make this happen and to make this correction under the enrollment history update link, you need to pull up that link and you'll see two boxes. You'll see the campus enrollment section and then you'll see the program level enrollment section. You're going to make edits to both. Under the campus enrollment section, you're going to enter an updated certification date and an updated anticipated completion date if there's a change there. You're also going to update the existing row where you have that W to show that it's no longer withdrawn and that it is graduated. Don't add a new row, update the existing row. Same thing for the program level enrollment box underneath of that. You want to pull that up and then go to the existing row showing the withdrawn status and you want to mark that as graduated. You can verify at that point, once you've done your entries, that the updated status is all there, and then click the Submit button that you find there at the lower center of the screen. And if all has gone well, you will then see a confirmation page that displays your updated data at both the institution and the program level. All you need to do here is verify the updated statuses and dates, and then click the Confirm button again at the bottom of the page. We make you confirm it a couple times. And if it all looks good, you can click Confirm and it'll capture your changes into the system. Assuming that it went off without a hitch and there was no hiccup when the system made the change to your record, you will look for the little I at the top of the page that says Successfully Updated, and congratulations, you have fixed that record. Just as a side note, if you want to then go back and see what your successfully updated student looks like now, you can just go back to the program enrollment detail screen, and then you can view those edits that you made right there, and they should show. So this is our next one, misreported effective dates. Another common problem scenario that we see are misreported effective dates. The effective date is the earliest date when a given enrollment status first took effect for that student, either at the campus level or at the program level. And the effective date should remain the same as long as the student is enrolled in the same enrollment status. If there's no change in enrollment status, there is no need to change the effective date. So just keep those as they are. So if you had a student who was full-time last semester and is continuing full-time this semester, no need, and there's no change in the enrollment status, there's no need to go in and then reaffirm this semester with a new effective date that they're full-time again. So it's important to avoid doing this because advancing the effective date using the existing status inactivates previously reported enrollment records for your student. This can create problems, for example, with the student subsidized usage limit calculations, which will be looking at not only what percentage of time the borrower is enrolled in, but also when those enrollments were effective. So it's going to be looking at all that. So just remember, don't advance the effective date unless the student's enrollment status has changed since the last report. So here we have an example of what this might look like for a school. Our student here, Max, was enrolled at North-South University in a 4-year public relations program as a full-time student. He was enrolled continuously until he graduated. His school, however, North-South, changed the effective date at the start of each term. As you can see there, the 3 full-time reports. Oops, pardon me. Since the date which a graduation event occurs has a direct impact on whether a student is counted in a particular scorecard cohort, repairing any errors in the effective date will definitely be critical to getting everything in there accurately for your school scorecard data. So to fix a misreported effective date, navigate again to the enrollment history update page, and under the campus enrollment, you want to enter the updated certification date. Then under campus and program enrollment areas, you want to enter a new effective date value on the graduation status row. You verify your updates look good, and then submit. And then you'll get the confirmation page again for the enrollment history update showing that your updates went in. Just verify everything looks good to you before the system stores the change, and if it does, you click submit, and you should again get that successfully completed record. So let's take a look at another example, a misreported credential level. This is relatively common. It's the 3rd type of error that we see. Misreported credential levels in the college scorecard. In college scorecard, the credential level is part of a string of data elements like the OPEID, CIP code, credential level, and the published program length, which all of them together, when they're combined, define what the scorecard calculations define as a unique program. As a result, when credential level is misreported, this has the potential to throw off your institution's program level calculations in the scorecard. But an incorrect credential level can also potentially affect a student's eligibility for interest subsidies. So we want to make sure that we get those right whenever we can. In the example we have here, you can see here that Mona is enrolled in a 4-year business/commerce bachelor's degree program. North-South University Central Campus has mistakenly reported her in a 4-year doctoral program, an 06 level program, which is impacting her eligibility for interest subsidies. Similar to the other errors that we're going to fix, we again here can use our enrollment history update. And to fix the misreported credential level, you have to create a new program and delete the old one in the system. So this one is different from the others in that in order to fix a credential level, because credential level is part of the unique string of identifiers that define what a unique program is, what we have to do is create a new program and delete the old one. And I say it in exactly that order because you don't want to get into a scenario where you're like, okay, I know what I need to do. One's got to get created, one's got to get deleted. You delete the first one first, and now you've got nothing on your screen to base the rebuild of your new program based off of. So you want to create that new one first while you can see the old one right underneath of it. To do this, just go to the enrollment history update page. Under the campus enrollment, you're going to again, enter an updated certification date, and then you're going to go under the program enrollment area, and then your first thing you're going to do is click the Add a Program button. You click that Add a Program button, and it will add and it will give you the chance to add a new correct credential level, and then copy. What you want to do is copy the program's CIP code, published program length, program begin date, special program indicator, enrollment status, and all the effective date information from the old program. And the only thing that's going to be different is that credential level that you've added. So it's important to do that step first, like I say, because this saves you from having to rebuild it from memory, and nobody wants to have to be in that situation, especially if you've got semester after semester of enrollment data that you're trying to rebuild. Once all of that new instance is built, go down to the old instance with the incorrect credential level. And what you're going to do is on each one of those rows on the far left column there where you see the delete, you're going to check off each of those boxes to delete the row. Once you've got that done, you take a look at all of your information. If it looks good to you, click the Submit button at the bottom of the page, and you'll get a confirmation page once again showing your update. Verify that your new program details are correct. And note in this case, the one difference in this scenario is that you're going to see at the very bottom there with the old program that you're deleting with the incorrect credential level information, all of those are going to be marked with an enrollment status now of Z, no record found. This is the NSLDS standard for when you're getting rid of that old program information. Once again, click that confirm button if everything looks good to you, and get your enrollment history successfully updated acknowledgement from the system. All right, the final error that we're going to talk about today is that the student was never reported for whatever reason. It was an oversight, it happens from time to time, and you just want to fix that error. When you have a student that was never reported on in the past, we've got an example here with Carlos. He was not reported on by North-South University to NSLDS up to date. All the campus and program level enrollment information needs to be entered from scratch if the student has or is attending but has not yet been certified at a particular school location. So to report a student through the enrollment history update, the process is super simple. You'll just start off with the blank boxes for campus and program enrollment. At the campus level, you'll need to enter the certification date and again, the anticipated completion date. And then at the program level box, you're going to enter in the enrolled program CIP code, credential level, published program length, program begin date, special program indicator, and all the enrollment status rows that pertain to him, along with the effective dates for any status changes that you're aware of along the way that you're able to report on. Here we show the school entered a row showing the student's enrollment full-time starting in August 2014. And then that student's subsequent graduation on July 31st, 2018. Since the student was only enrolled in one program, you see here that their campus level graduation event date was the same as the program completion event date on here. So after you've entered all this information for Carlos, you just want to verify it one more time. All looks good, go ahead and submit. And then the system brings you to the confirmation page showing the new campus and the program enrollment record that you've just created. If all still looks good to you, go ahead and click confirm, and you get your successfully updated page showing that the new record was stored, and you are set. So hopefully this gives you a good overview of what's going on in NSLDS around the program level enrollment information. Like I said at the start, it's super critical that that program level enrollment data is reported and then it's as accurate as you can make it, because it does have a vital impact, not only on the scorecard data that your school is going to be pulling up over the web now, but also for your students for things like subsidized usage eligibility. Hopefully, I guess we can open it up now to any questions that folks may have. Feel free to come up and use the mics. I think they should all be working.
Hi, I'm curious still, where are you getting the income data from? I have schools coming to me, I'm a third-party servicer, saying that they didn't ever report any income, and yet they're being told it comes from NSLDS, and they have no
Correct.
idea where it came from.
You're absolutely correct. NSLDS's contribution to this is strictly the enrollment reporting to establish the cohorts, which of your students get placed into which buckets, as well as the median loan debt information. The salary information, the income information you're getting is coming from IRS in an aggregated file. So we don't publish anything that's personally identifiable to individual students, but we get aggregate level information at the program level from the IRS, and that's what gets published in the scorecard.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure.
You gave a lot of examples of doing manual entries in the NSLDS, but if you're using the clearinghouse, doesn't the clearinghouse supersede that data unless you make the change with them? And doesn't it override it? Because that's what we see when we make these manual updates. Unless you make it with the clearinghouse too, the clearinghouse is going to override it. So I just want to make clear that we also need to let the clearinghouse know. Otherwise, what we just did manually is going to be erased with the next.
Absolutely. No, we would definitely want you to coordinate with Clearinghouse if they're doing the majority of your enrollment reporting, and then you hop in and you're making a change. You don't want them to go back and then re-report something that's bad data. You want to make sure that they're aware that.
All right, just another quick question.
Yep.
When it's college scorecard, there are like 3 variations of college scorecard. You have the college scorecard that you do for military veterans, for the veterans benefits, college score. Then you have the college scorecard where the schools voluntarily is part of the award letter, college scorecard. So is there going to be a deviation or variation? So when you say college scorecard, we know which college scorecard you're talking about, because when you come in, it's like, how is this one different from this scorecard and this scorecard? So will there be some differentiation, or will this supersede the need for these other scorecards? I stumped you on that one?
I'll let Brian field this one.
So I think there's a college score, we call this college scorecard. There's other products like Navigator, and that's sort of legislative, so we can't really rename that or coin that. For the military, I'm not exactly sure what the name is.
It's shopping cart. It's a shopping cart. Yeah,
shopping cart. We can coordinate with them to the extent that,
shopping
you know,
sheet. Yeah, so
sheet.
their shopping sheet. I mean, so it's like you can kind of get confused with those. And I wasn't sure that, you know.
I think that's a fair point, but each unique product, I think, serves a different audience. So I think maybe to your point, maybe we'll just go back and think about, you know, how to tailor the message and the marketing that this is for this type of user.
Okay. And the last question, you mentioned using IPEDS data a lot, and IPEDS, of course, focuses primarily on first-time, full-time traditional students. And as we saw in this morning's session, we're getting a lot more non-traditional transfer students, cohorts that really change the graduation rates and whatnot because you're not using that traditional 4 or 5 year. Will IPEDS change so that you can count those cohorts, or are you going to still stick to the traditional formulas from which you're going to be compiling this data and sending out in the community?
I'm looking at Scott here in case he wants to come up and help answer that. But for graduation rates specifically, we've updated this in the past couple of weeks when we did the big college scorecard update. We are using the outcome measures survey component, which includes students beyond first-time, full-time students. That's only for degree granting institutions, but we're trying to leverage that to the extent possible.
And the last question, you talked about having 2,000 metrics. How many are the schools going to provide? Is there more information we're going to have to provide in the long run so that we can ensure the integrity of data? Because if this is a marketing tool for us, we want to make sure the information that's out there is correct and accurate. So, you know, how do we vet this data, compare the data? Are they going to give any guidance on how this kind of needs to, you know?
Sure. So Scorecard derives all its information from administrative data. So to the extent they're pulling from IPEDS, you know, we encourage you to coordinate with your IR office to make sure those, and then to the point that, you know, Glenn is making, we encourage anything that goes into NSLDS to just double check that and ensure that those, because all the data, all 2,000 elements are derived from administrative data.
Are standalone graduate schools included in the scorecard? And if so, where are you pulling the data from? Because we have different accrediting agencies and report differently and things like that.
So we have, like I mentioned before, we have 3 products. One is our consumer site, which often gets the most publicity. That right now focuses only on undergraduate granting institutions. But for any observation we have in NSLDS, we will make that. We will make a calculation as long as there's an OPID, as long as there's a CIP code and a credential level.
I tried entering our standalone graduate school OPEID, and I couldn't find us on the scorecard.
Right, so I think you need to go, so if you're looking at sort of the consumer site, which is sort of focused on undergraduates for now, we're thinking of ways to incorporate graduate, you're not going to find it if it doesn't, you have to go to what we call the data page, and I can show you where that page is, and you
Yeah,
can look at
I
your
really
data.
appreciate it because the law schools, the professors blog about these things. And so my dean came and said, they're blogging and we're on this and where is it coming from? So I immediately went to the scorecard and tried pulling our information up and it doesn't exist. And I said, I have no idea. He said, go to that session and find out.
Okay, so collegescorecard.ed.gov is the consumer sort. So if you do it /data, you'll be able to get those data.
/data. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Hi, I have two questions for NSLDS. Reporting a student who you hadn't reported, is that a requirement if the student has no Title IV aid and the student is not in your NSLDS database?
If the student has no Title IV aid, my understanding is it is a required, you're saying no. Okay. Yeah, if they're not in NSLDS with either a loan or grant, then you don't report them. I was under the impression, though, that if they were a transfer and they had Title IV aid at a previous school and then they transferred into a
Right.
new school, you still, even though they're not getting aid under your school.
Right, but at least that
you still
record's
wanna
already
report.
created in NSLDS,
Yeah.
right? And the second thing is, when you're talking about updating a status, say from withdrawn to graduated, going through your update page, does that then update the program enrollment, the status page, where it shows your enrollment status? I reported as withdrawn, say on this date. Now you go in and you make your corrections on this update page. Does that go and update the enrollment status you reported from withdrawn to graduated with that same date
It
on
sh-
the enrollment page?
It should show on your program enrollment detail, if that's what you're referring to. Like,
So-
once you've made that change in the enrollment history update, you'll have a box for both campus level and program level. And if you've updated properly in both of those and then save it, and then visit the program detail, enrollment detail page, it should show there.
Okay, but now you've just deleted information I had previously reported because, say, a month ago, I did report it as withdrawn because that's the status our SIS system shows. And when the auditors come to look, they're going to say, well, your statuses don't match anymore because in your system, you were withdrawn on this date, and now in NSLDS, you're showing that you reported them as graduated on that date. So we have a conflict that way because that's something that they do check in our audits.
I see.
So there's no
So in
history.
your home system, the way you
We don't
record that
override
change in
that
your home
status,
system,
yeah.
you're reporting a new effective date and a new row instead of overwriting the existing.
Actually, it's the same
withdrawn.
effective date. We would say you still graduated, say, at the end of the program. We just didn't get our paperwork done for 30 days later. So our certification date is 30 days later, but the day you effectively graduated was the same day we said you had withdrawn.
Yeah. No, I know our guidance is we definitely, right now in NSLDS, we want you to overwrite that W with the graduated status. But
Okay.
I will bring that concern back and we can talk about it.
Okay, I have a question about the earn.
couldn't
Were you
hear.
talking to them?
Okay. So Brent's saying the certification date is the date that you do the update. So as long as you update it on that day or you report that
The
certification
certification
date.
date. We would, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So my withdrawn status will still be in the inactive history? Yeah. Okay. Okay, all right, thanks. Well, we report every 30 days, and this is not traditional, this is non-term, so it's not semester-based. Does that make sense?
Question over here?
Okay, I have a question about the W-2 information on salary. If a student graduates and say is a biology major, works a couple of years, so you're tracking that, and then goes to nursing school, Does the previous earnings just drop, and then you pick up the new school for nursing school and report that later on with the cohort for the nursing school graduates?
So as of now, we only have the first year earnings. So if it's a double major, we will count that person in multiple cohorts. We haven't released the methodology for multiple years, where I think that will be more the case. But we will make adjustments for that, and we'll document how we're going to do that when we produce two-year earnings and further out.
Or if a person changes their field of employment after a while, you were computer science, decided you didn't like it, now you're an accountant, what?
So we won't have information related to that because
They're already gone from the school.
because we don't have that administrative data from the W-2s per se. I mean, there are industry codes, but even within industries, you could be like a business person or a computer science person. So we won't have that. We won't be able to observe that. Or
Okay, so it's close enough is good enough, right? Well, it's more than we have right now.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it's also to the extent that a lot of students are going into a different field afterwards because they find they don't like it. I think it's still suggestive
Somewhat
or
useful.
an estimate of where people end up a couple years later, 3 years later.
And the viewer has to realize it's data that's 2 years old, the salaries.
It's 1 year.
Because in 2019, you're reporting on 17's earnings. And so a parent looking at that, should be aware of that. Is that I forget if it's in bold print or that it's 17 data from IPEDS that's being reported.
Oh, I think your point is that because they're 2 years old, we should maybe make that more explicit in our caveats
Yeah.
and footnotes.
I
We'll
think
take that
so.
back. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Hi. I think it's been a yeoman's task on your part to be able to go from institutional to program. But there are critics out there, and one of the criticisms is the cohorts for debt and earnings are different. And the other is earnings, you're using earnings 1 year out after graduation. And even it was recognized in the GE data that immediate earnings are not necessarily reflective of what the student will earn in his career. So are you thinking of changing any of that as you go forward?
So I guess there's a couple things. So in our back-end database, we do have trend data so that you can match the same sort of temporal aspects, the same timeline as the debt and the earnings. What you can't match is that the borrowers are the debt is of borrowers only, and that the earnings include, Pell-only students. We're not, if that's something you're interested in, I'm interested in hearing more. We did have a technical review panel
Right.
that, there was pretty strong consensus that median loan debt is more intuitive to prospective consumers when we think about borrowers only, and then coupling that with the frequency of borrowing. So that's where that's derived from, and that's based on that recommendation. I think we're going to stick with that. But happy to hear other comments.
Well, the critics said if you're looking at earnings to pay off debt, it should be the same cohort. But you're the people developing it, so perhaps I can see your rationale.
Yeah, and we'll continue looking at our methodology. Appreciate
Okay,
the
thank you.
feedback.
Hello. I have a question about NSLDS enrollment reporting. So at our institution, sometimes we have students who stop out and get a lesser degree, and they were actually never in that program of study. How, in reporting that student as a graduate to NSLDS, do I put a begin date if the student never was actually enrolled in that program?
I would think you'd have to inactivate. If you previously had reported they were enrolled, but now you want to show that they're not, you would have to do that inactivation, right? You would go in to the program level part of the enrollment history update screen, and then you would want to use those little delete checkboxes for each of the terms that you reported they were enrolled in that program. And then you would want to build, if they were actually enrolled in a different program, then you would just want to, the first step would actually be to build that other program first, and then.
So in essence, these students never actually enrolled in the specific program that they graduated from. So now I'm reporting that as a graduated student from, let's say they were in accounting, and that's what we paid aid for, and that's what we've been reporting for. Now they've technically withdrawn from that, but they got a degree in liberal arts or something like that. Then at that point, I would put them as graduated in NSLDS, correct?
You're saying they were in as graduated under accounting, but really they graduated under just liberal arts?
Well, I'm just saying they graduated from a different program than what we've been reporting them on.
Sure.
So now I'm reporting them as graduated in the new program, but they've never been admitted to that program per se. So how would I report them? So like, would they have a begin date of when they began the other program, or is it a begin date of the day they graduate?
So if they were never admitted to the other program, I guess what I'm not following yet is why
Okay.
report them as graduated in a program they weren't admitted in.
Okay, so we don't need to report them as graduated then, maybe.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, in a roundabout way, I guess that's sort of where we're landing. Yeah, because if they were never formally admitted into a new program, you're using liberal arts as sort of like the catch-all. You know, they don't have a major, but they graduated from the institution, and that's allowable at my institution. Yeah, I would imagine. Do you have a program code, a major that you
Yes.
then switch them to in your system?
Well, we can switch them and then admit them to that program, then graduate them, but then you're also then dating something in the system for a previous semester.
Right.
Where then you're overriding what you just sent.
Yeah, I mean, unless they actually graduated in that accounting program, we certainly don't want them to be reported as graduated under accounting and to be counted as that into your scorecard metrics. But the question then about internal accounting at your school, about how, what do we put them into? Do we officially admit them into this major or not? I'm going to leave to the institution to determine, but we don't want you making anything up and reporting it to Scorecard. I would say once that borrower has been officially admitted into another major, or if they are, post officially admitted into that major, and then you reporting it in your system as graduated, at that point, Scorecard wants to know about it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hi, I had some questions about the metrics. I just want to make sure that students really understand the numbers in relation to the group. Let's say we have 100 graduates, but only 10 of them had debt, and we're looking at that debt, and maybe it represents a big number, and it might scare a student about a program. Is there going to be anything where we could say, we had 100 students, 10 had debt, this is the debt? Where we can give it more depth to the numbers.
This helps. We don't have the frequency of borrowing at the program level, but through iPads, we do have sort of this description where we have the 26%. Does that sort of answer your question?
Okay, and then when they see the actual number, they know that only 26% would have had debt. Good. And then in terms of earnings, so if a student, you're looking at W-2s, what if a student started a job midway through the year? How is that going to represent a full year's earnings?
It's just the annual earnings. We don't have a way through the W-2s to get a sense for what that represents in terms of how many days or months worked.
So if the school is collecting any data, would it be beneficial for the school to share that, or is there an appeals process of some sort? You know what I mean?
I think we try to cover it with the exclusions, right? So if a student was enrolled in any institution, if they had military deferment, and then the zero. So that's sort of the proxy for it. I'd be curious to get your data source. There's no challenge process now, but I'm just personally curious of how
Yeah.
you
And we
derive
don't
that
do
information.
it, but if there were a
Oh, I
process.
see.
And we could check- I mean, it would
I
be
see.
interesting to see if, we could have a system to
Yeah,
better track it or, know when a student started and stopped.
yeah. I think that's food for thought. I appreciate that feedback.
Hi, you had spoke about undergraduate and graduate, the indebtedness and the separations of that. But what about professional level debt, specifically those students who get additional because of a health profession, and then maybe take a master's degree program after getting that health profession degree? What I'm finding is I have inflated indebtedness for my master's level students because their health professions, that professional degree debt is included in there too. So I don't know if I'm doing something wrong or if there's a differentiation that can be made in there.
So for next year, when we start to look further out, or in future years when we look further out, we are looking at ways to adjust for sort of what's the highest degree and did someone go on to something else. But since, for 2019, what we have now is just the first year earnings. We haven't made any adjustments for that. But
Okay.
there
So we're
will-
stuck with it right now.
Well, I guess you're saying. to the
Because
extent that someone-
we're getting, one of our accreditation teams is coming after us saying, hey, why is this master's program, it's $170,000 in median debt. Well, many of these students already received that professional degree, that health professions degree, and probably 160 something is that debt, and then maybe 10 or 15 is the master's program that they did after completing that degree. And that's where we're having an issue right now.
Okay.
So-
That's good feedback, and we are, in the process of thinking about how to make adjustments for, I think there was an earlier
Okay.
question on that, and we'll hopefully have something in a subsequent year.
Okay, thank you.
I just have a comment on the college scorecard. There's a tremendous amount of information on there now, which is great. But I know when my executives look at it, say, where's the data coming from? We know where it's coming from, but the time frames are all so different of what cohorts you're using and that type of thing. So I'm wondering, in those little information boxes that you see there, when you hover over them, does that give you the time frames or a source, say iPads 15, 16? I mean, it would just make it so much easier if there was a cheat sheet on the college scorecard that says, here's all your data elements, and this is the time frame that they're referring to or that they pulled from, because I hate going into that API and looking at all 2,000 elements and trying to figure out the time frames.
Yeah. So we do have that information in our data dictionary. We have something called the cohort
Yeah.
map. What I'm hearing you say is that that's hard to read, and
I have
we'll-
my IT guy figure all that stuff out, but when somebody calls me and says, I want to know what this information, where it's pulled from right now, to have to go back to him. So if there was maybe just a summary of the elements, just the elements that you put on there saying, this debt comes from this fee, or this time frame, and this whatever number comes from this time frame, it would be helpful.
Okay.
Something to
Appreciate
think
that
about.
feedback.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
Right. My institution is an access institution. Our mission, and it's right in our catalog, is to help prepare students who may not otherwise, usually first-generation attendees, prepare them to move into other schools. Because of that, our graduation rates are incredibly low. Is there any way that, again, you talk about adding caveats in here, that there might be an option for schools to be able to identify certain caveats that could be put into the scorecard to help give a truer picture of what that school is?
So the question is there a way, sort of like a way for institutions to write those caveats, or just for us to?
Or have you guys
Okay.
write a series of them that schools could check box and have you added to the individual schools? Again, just a shot in the dark idea, but I know our graduation rate, if you're a parent looking at graduation rates of schools and you say, oh no, that's incredibly low, don't go there, knowing that they're not going to look at too much other information, it really isn't a true descriptor of what my school does.
Yeah. We have tried to do that with sort of the lower screen here, so you have kind of a graduated and transfer. We can look at ways to kind of further highlight that as
Okay.
well.
Thank you.
Is there a requirement to put the link for the college scorecard in your catalog or on your websites or any of your materials?
Not that we're aware of.
I didn't think so, but I want to check. Thank you.
So this past summer, you guys hosted a webinar for us to audit the last previous award years for this refresh. Is this something that you guys are going to do every summer that we can expect going forward? Or how often will you guys refresh the data?
We're going to refresh the scorecard data annually,
Okay.
and we're going to look as far back as we can.
Okay.
Is that your question?
Yeah, I know, because when you hosted the webinar this past June, I think you told all the schools to get it done by July for
Right.
this big refresh, but you said go back to award years. So I just want to know going forward that this is something we could like expect like every summer with regard to your time frame for the refresh.
Oh, in terms of when
Yeah.
to do the
Yeah.
data, I would recommend if you could do it sooner
Yeah.
than the summer, that
Okay.
you do
Okay.
it sooner. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, everyone, thank you so much for coming out and hearing us, and feel free to look us up if you have any more.